Ithala, a development finance agency partly owned by the KwaZulu-Natal government, says it will be filing for an urgent interdict to contest the repayment administrator's orders. This comes after the South African Reserve Bank's Prudential Authority filed a court application to liquidate the entity. Itala has been operating without a full banking license under an exemption that expired in December 2023. Economist Dr. Jason Musyoka has urged depositors not to panic as the South African Reserve Bank has an insurance fund set up.
What the South African Reserve Bank has done, because of the regularity of or the increasing numbers of banks that are collapsing for a range of reasons, they set up an insurance fund that secures deposits. And so depositors are still able to get money from that insurance fund. It's not a huge amount of money because, especially for the high-end depositors, but the insurance allows depositors, if a bank goes under, they're able to withdraw at least 100,000 from their deposits. But the bank, of course, ultimately, after liquidation, South African Reserve Bank will look into ways in which it can subsidize so that the deposits are paid out.
Yeah.
So there's not huge risk at the moment as far as the depositors are concerned. But there is what you call a run in deposits, where people panic and they go and start withdrawing. And that's really what creates this ripple effect that you're seeing now.
For more reaction to the Itala saga, I'm now joined by Denker Capital Director Koki Kweyman. Koki, a very good evening to you. I want to shoot right into perhaps just the other options that could have been available. Were there possible other options apart from this potential liquidation when one looks at how things have unfolded over the years?
Yeah, very few. The problem with a bank is in that once the public loses trust in a bank, then the parties that stand the most to lose are the depositors. And depositors start withdrawing their money. And, then you get what is called a run on deposits or a bank run. And, that is basically unstoppable. And many, many years ago in South Africa, that led to Sambo falling over and having to be rescued, and the same with BOE. And globally, it's a nasty phenomenon when depositors lose their trust. So in this case, when it was placed under initial administration by the Reserve Bank or the Prudential Authority, what I've read is that they did say that although depositors can't withdraw their money, their deposits are safe. So in that regard, I think number one for people who have got money on deposit with Itala Bank, the deposit is safe and it will be paid out, but it will be all at one stage when the problem is resolved. And I'm sure that means that the interest on deposit should also be honored. That I'm not too sure about. But in terms of other options, there are other options. The one would be for the government or Treasury to recapitalize the bank, although the bank says it has enough capital. And from the outside, it looks as it has enough capital. From the outside, we just can't see how good the quality of the loan book is. And also the problem is twofold in that the information systems and the computer systems there was a project on upgrading that money went nowhere, and the computer systems are poor, so your information is not good. So we don't know how good the lending book is. In other words, how many loans did they make that are not being repaid? But the easy option is to raise capital and to get good management in that will regain the trust. But that takes time.
Yeah. And when it comes to the KZN provincial government, which is obviously a shareholder, where would you say that it failed in its duties when it comes to Itala? I mean, we've heard from the KZN Treasury MEC who's raised concerns over the repayment administrator's attitude and approach, but that's once the problem obviously had now come to fruition. From the inception of the problem, when the institution was being asked over and over again for compliance to be able to be regulated properly as well and to function and operate like a bank does, What should the KZN provincial government, as a shareholder, have done from the onset to nip this in the bud?
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult now to apportion blame, but certainly the problem has been growing for at least 3 years. That's when the Prudential Authority also warned, and each time there was this problem where the technicality that they are not fully a bank, so they're operating under a temporary license, and each time the temporary license was just, they were given some grace. And I think the shareholders, and all the shareholders, but obviously the largest shareholders, I'm not sure if they understood the extent of the problem and the risk that the Prudential Authority was going to close it down, because the Reserve Bank can't afford a run on a bank and a lack of trust in a banking system. So I think the shareholders and the KwaZulu-Natal government should have acted earlier, both in terms of just trying to make sure that they attract good management. It also seems that they haven't been able to attract good management, and also just to make sure that it's well capitalized. So in summary, I almost think the people that should have made the decisions weren't urgent enough. There wasn't enough urgency saying, if we don't get this done, then the bank is going to be closed down.
And I know it may seem like, a little bit about crying over spilt milk, but do you get a sense that because the institution had this exemption and was able to function and operate as a bank, that they probably rested on their laurels a little bit when there were those warnings to say that you do actually need to do all that is required, because they were allowed to operate as a bank from the get-go anyway?
Yeah. And look, just by the way, from what I've read, and I've done quite a bit of reading, it seems like the bank did fulfill a very good and useful function in the rural areas, and the rural communities there were dependent on it. So from that point of view, I totally agree. It would be a shame to let it fall over. And in previous cases like that, you go to another bank and you say, can you take over the system? Just help us with the management information systems, and we continue to manage the branches and the clients. And that would be one alternative. What I have heard is that the other banks haven't been interested because Itala is just a bit too small for them to allocate management time to them. But if the government comes to the party as well and says, we don't want this bank to fail, we will, if there's a proper plan with good management, with the bank coming in, we will commit so much just to keep it going for 6 to 9 months. I think from the Reserve Bank's point of view, and that's the point you're making, that we've been here quite a few times, and each time there were warnings given, and each time another suspension. So maybe they've said this time enough. But yeah, from the outside, it would be a shame to let it go. And let's see what the court decides on Monday. But I think it doesn't help to just come with a court order and to prove that the balance sheet is sound. You've also got to prove that you've got good management in place.
Yeah, and it would be a shame indeed when we think about why the inception of it and the motive behind this bank, why it was created in the first place. And I think also that's why that National Treasury has stepped in to provide assurance to depositors, confirming that the government will guarantee their funds. Is there some solace there for those depositors at least?
Yeah, so I think depositors at least don't have to worry. They will get their money back. The only problem is if you need it tomorrow, you're not going to be able to get it tomorrow. But even that, in theory, you should be able to get to sell to someone and get it at a discounted price. It's an interesting point, maybe just that people make who are critical of what is happening. And it is true that it's become very, very difficult for small businessmen, and even more difficult in rural areas, but in cities as well, to get finance from banks. And that's partly internationally because so much regulation and so much regulatory burden and capital requirements placed on banks. There are two other countries that have tackled this problem. Turkey is one and Indonesia is one. where you had a joint venture, banks and government, where the government said, okay, what I will do, I will carry 1/3 of your bad debts or 1/3 of your interest burden. And note, it didn't say I'll carry all your bad debts, because that was tried in the UK, another case where it actually failed because the government took total ownership. You want the bank to be on risk, so they still apply their mind, but to know that the government will pay in some of the risk to make it just that more profitable, to allow them to help small businessmen. So that's one thing I would almost say, if I was in the courtroom or government was to ask me, I would say, save this bank and maybe use this as a prototype of what we can do in South Africa with government and private sector working together, and the government come with some subsidy, but using the private sector expertise and the knowledge that Itala has of their communities.
Yeah, and that's really important indeed. Thank you so much, Koki, also to remind us of those rural communities and those small businesses that will need that kind of assistance that Itala was providing for them, so that there would be a void that is left there as well, should that institution get liquidated. Thank you so much. That is Koki Koeman, who is at Denker Capital as a director.